The man with the cross, Keanu Reeves, stepped through the tall glass doors of the Avalon Grand, a luxury hotel perched above the hills with views that whispered of wealth and status. Everything about the place gleamed: polished marble floors, golden railings, crystal chandeliers, and staff dressed so immaculately they looked like paintings. He had stayed here before, years ago, back when no one looked twice at his quiet presence. But this time, he wasn't here for press or pleasure. He had come for something deeper, something he wouldn't speak of yet. Around his neck hung a small wooden cross. It wasn't flashy or heavy. It looked hand-carved, as if made with love and time rather than money. To Keanu, it wasn't just a symbol. It was a quiet reminder of someone he had once lost, a young girl he used to visit at a hospice center, whose faith had helped him through his darkest years. He never took it off, not even now, at a place where image meant everything. Approached the front desk where a young woman, Carla, smiled automatically. But beside her stood a tall man in a tailored suit with hair slicked back and a cold stare that flickered across Keanu's chest before settling into something like disdain. His name tag read, Jared, Guest Experience Director. "Sir?" Jared said, stepping in front of Carla with a tight smile. "May I ask the nature of your visit?" Keanu smiled gently. "Just checking in." Jared's eyes dropped again to the small cross. He didn't hide his expression. "We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain image here at the Avalon Grand. Subtle luxury, discretion, tradition." "Understood," Keanu said, unfazed. "Then you'll understand," Jared continued, "that some guests find religious symbols to be a bit, what's the word, outdated, especially when worn openly in a space designed for neutrality and sophistication." Carla's eyes widened slightly, but she stayed silent. Keanu paused. He looked around at the walls, the soft piano playing in the background, the scent of lavender and lemonwood. Everything was designed to relax, to welcome. And yet here he was, being asked, politely but firmly, to hide the one thing that meant the most to him. "Is it against the hotel's policy to wear a cross?" he asked, his voice calm. "Not explicitly," Jared replied, smoothing his tie. "But we reserve the right to protect the comfort of all guests." Keanu didn't argue. He simply nodded once, then turned toward the elevator. He hadn't made a scene. He hadn't raised his voice. But something about his silence unsettled Jared more than an outburst ever could. Up in his suite, Keanu placed his single bag on the bed. The room was lavish, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported furniture, a private bar. Yet it felt cold. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below, the sun casting shadows across rooftops and crowded streets. His hand moved to the cross. A memory surfaced. A hospital room. A girl with no hair but bright eyes. She had placed the cross around his neck with trembling fingers and whispered, "This means you're never alone again." He had cried in that moment, not loud, but the kind of tears that shake the soul. After she passed, he'd worn the cross every day. It had saved him when nothing else could. He turned away from the window. His phone buzzed. A message from his friend Clara, a journalist. "Are you sure this is the place?" "Avalon isn't known for humility," he replied. "It's not about them. It's about a promise I made." He was meeting someone here, someone he hadn't seen in 15 years. Someone whose story was tied to that cross, to the past he had buried under layers of work, pain, and quiet acts of kindness. But the hotel's staff had already begun whispering. Word of the guest with the cross had spread among them. Some wondered if he was some eccentric millionaire. Others said he was trying to provoke attention. A few recognized him but said nothing. And Jared? Well, Jared had already decided this guest was a problem. Later that evening, Keanu walked to the hotel restaurant. He wore a simple suit, no designer label, nothing flashy. But the cross still hung around his neck. As he entered, a couple at a nearby table noticed. The woman leaned over and said just loud enough, "Isn't it a little bold to wear that? In a place like this?" The man chuckled. "Maybe he thinks it makes him deep." Keanu heard it. He simply nodded to, the waiter, and sat at his reserved table near the back. He didn't need attention. He just wanted peace. Then it happened. Jared appeared again, this time with a forced smile and 2 security guards behind him. "Sir," he said in a voice that tried too hard to sound calm, "I'm afraid we've had several guest complaints this evening." "About what?" Keanu asked quietly. "Your choice of accessory. Again, we ask that you either tuck it in or remove it entirely while dining in our public areas." Keanu stood up, still calm. "I'm not here to disturb anyone. I'm here to keep a promise. This isn't about the cross. It's about fear, and maybe a little ignorance." Jared's face turned red, but he forced a smile. "If you're unwilling to comply, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave the premises." The restaurant had gone silent. Forks paused mid-air. Someone at the bar turned to watch. Even the music had faded into something tense and fragile. Keanu took one last look around the room. Then he turned toward the door and walked out. No anger, no shame, just a quiet resolve. But the story was far from over. As he left, Carla followed him into the lobby. She caught up just as he reached the exit. "Sir," she said, breathless. "I'm sorry about what happened. It's not fair. I know who you are. I also know what that cross means. You don't have to explain." He looked at her with grateful eyes. "Thank you." She hesitated. "There's something else. Jared is hiding something. I don't know everything yet, but if you stay one more night, I'll show you." Keanu paused, then gave a small nod. The elevator doors closed behind him, and outside, in the shadows of the valet area, a figure watched him closely. Someone he hadn't seen since the day the little girl gave him the cross. Someone who could change everything. Whispers behind the glass, the night air outside the Avalon Grand was crisp, touched by the scent of pine trees and something colder. Judgment. While most guests slept wrapped in silk sheets and glass dreams, Keanu sat alone by the window in his suite, the city glowing below him like a restless memory. He didn't sleep. Not because he couldn't, but because sleep would only pull him into places he didn't want to return to. His fingers brushed the cross again, and as he held it, his mind drifted. Not to the insult, not to the shame, but to a promise. Still living and breathing, somewhere out there. Earlier that day, he had quietly left a message at the front desk with a name on it. Jonathan Mercer. It wasn't someone from Hollywood. Not a director, not a producer. Jonathan had once been a boy on the edge of death, a leukemia patient at the same hospice, center as the girl who gave Keanu the cross. They were friends, and Keanu had visited often, always bringing books and laughter. Jonathan had survived. She hadn't. And now, 15 years later, Jonathan was the reason Keanu had returned. There was something he needed to give him, something beyond words, beyond even the pain they both still carried. But now there was something else tangled in the silence. Carla, the young woman from the front desk, had seen something. Her voice still echoed in his ears. "Jared is hiding something. If you stay one more night, I'll show you." It wasn't just a passing comment. She had looked afraid. Not of Keanu, but of what she knew. The next morning, the hotel was quieter than usual. It was almost too quiet. In a place where luxury hummed like a lullaby, there was tension in the way the staff avoided eye contact and whispered when they thought no one was listening. Keanu walked through the lobby dressed the same way, simple black suit, the wooden cross still around his neck. He knew people noticed. He knew their eyes flickered from curiosity to discomfort, from recognition to confusion. But he also knew none of that mattered. Carla found him near the breakfast area, her steps hurried and her face pale. She handed him a folded note without saying a word, then walked off like nothing happened. Keanu waited a moment, then opened it. The incident, from 3 years ago. Ballroom 7th floor. Check the archives. They buried everything. He tucked the note into his coat pocket. She had taken a risk. He knew that kind of courage. It came from someone who had been hurt before, someone who had seen injustice up close and decided not to look away anymore. Keanu walked slowly, deliberately toward the private elevator that led to the 7th floor, a space usually reserved for large corporate events and weddings. No one stopped him. The halls were empty. Gold-framed portraits lined the walls, pretending to tell stories of elegance and grace. But behind one of those stories, something darker waited. He reached the ballroom doors. They were locked, but the adjacent side corridor led to a service room used by staff to clean and reset the space. The door wasn't locked. He slipped inside quietly. Dust covered the floor like forgotten promises. The room hadn't been used in months. In one corner sat an old cabinet marked Archival Events 2019-2023. He pulled it open, searching carefully until he found a file labeled simply, Incident Report, Internal Only. The report inside was thin. Too thin. But one photograph slid out from between the pages, a young woman, in a maid's uniform, crying near a broken champagne tray, a man in a suit pointing at her with rage, and behind him, Jared, watching silently, not helping, not stopping it. The man yelling at her had been drunk, a wealthy guest who had tripped and blamed the maid. Instead of defending her, Jared had fired her that night to protect the hotel's image. The woman had later filed a claim for wrongful termination, but the hotel's legal team had buried it under silence, offering a small payoff and a threat. Keanu stared at the photo. The woman, she wore a necklace, not a cross, but a small star. She had been dismissed not because of a mistake, but because of a symbol. And suddenly, things started to make sense. Jared wasn't just obsessed with image. He feared symbols that reminded him of humanity, of accountability, of anything that couldn't be bought or polished, anything that spoke of something higher than luxury. Keanu's cross wasn't the problem. It was the truth it represented. And Jared hated truth. Just as Keanu was placing the folder back, the door creaked open. It wasn't security. It was Jonathan. Older now, a full-grown man in his late 20s, he looked both familiar and different. His eyes were soft but worn. His posture was confident but humble. "I figured you'd find it," Jonathan said. "Carla reached out to me last night. She knew you were looking for answers." Keanu stepped forward, emotion catching in his chest. "You came. How could I not?" Jonathan smiled. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." They sat together for a moment in the dusty ballroom, surrounded by shadows and old stories. "Do you remember her?" Jonathan asked, voice quieter now. "Every day," Keanu replied. "She gave me this." He held up the cross. Jonathan nodded. "She told me she wanted you to have something that would make you strong when she couldn't be around anymore. I never told you, but she also left you something else. Something I've had all these years." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with time. Inside it was a note written in a young girl's handwriting. "If you ever feel alone again, find Jonathan. You two are stronger together. Love, Mia." Keanu's eyes welled. He hadn't cried in years, but these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of return, of something lost coming home. Jonathan leaned forward. "Jared doesn't belong here. Not just because he's cruel, but because people like him think love and faith are weaknesses. They think kindness should be hidden. I want to help you change that." "What are you suggesting?" Keanu asked. "We tell the truth," Jonathan said. "But we don't scream it. We show it. The world's tired of noise. What they need is something real, quiet, strong, unbreakable." Keanu nodded. "Then let's begin." They stepped out of the room together, two men connected by a girl's love and a memory that refused to die. But down in the lobby, Jared had already begun to notice the whispers returning. A staff member had seen Keanu with an old file. Carla had been seen speaking with him again. And Jared, already suspicious, was preparing his next move. He couldn't let this unravel, not after everything he had built. As Keanu and Jonathan reached the elevator, a phone call was being made behind the manager's desk. "Security," Jared said sharply. "I want both of them removed before sunset." When the silence breaks, the golden sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the glass walls of the Avalon Grand. The hotel still wore its elegance like armor, shining surfaces, muted piano melodies, and perfume that hung in the air like a whispered lie. But something had changed. Beneath the polished image, tension stirred like a storm brewing just out of sight. Keanu and Jonathan had returned to the suite, but they knew it wasn't safe for long. Jared was moving fast. The call had been made. The clock had started ticking. Jonathan stood by the window, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the sill, a habit he'd never broken since childhood. "He won't wait long," he said. "Once Jared senses he's losing control, he'll push harder. He'll try to isolate us, discredit us, maybe even erase us." Keanu turned from the folder he'd reopened, the incident report lying flat on the table between them. "He's already started. This isn't about one insult. It's a pattern, a sickness. He doesn't just fear symbols of belief. He fears what they bring out in people. He wants silence, not because it's peaceful, but because it's obedient." Jonathan crossed the room slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Then maybe it's time to break that silence. Not with anger, but with presence. The kind that doesn't demand attention. It earns it." Keanu nodded. "There's someone else we need." They left the room quietly and made their way to the employee wing, far from the shimmering guest halls tucked behind nondescript doors with no gold trim or velvet rope. It was the part of the hotel that most guests never saw, where workers moved silently like ghosts, keeping everything running so the illusion never cracked. But today, that illusion had already begun to fracture. Carla was waiting near the employee lounge, her face tense but steady. "I heard from one of the cleaning staff. Jared's pulled 2 security officers from the night shift and told them you're to be escorted out by 6. No explanation. He's calling it a breach of policy." Keanu gave a small smile. "Then we have a few hours left." Carla stepped closer. "I found something else. The maid from the photo. Her name was Lucia Mendoza. She didn't disappear after she was fired. She's been working 3 jobs since. One of them is just 10 blocks from here, at a local community shelter. I can get her here by 4. She agreed to speak." Jonathan looked up sharply. "You got her to talk?" Carla nodded. "She said she never forgot the humiliation. And when I told her what you were doing, what this is really about, she said she's ready." They didn't waste time. Carla left to bring Lucia while Jonathan and Keanu prepared. But the preparation wasn't about gathering weapons or raising voices. It was about gathering hearts. Truth needed witnesses. Not just ones who had been hurt, but those who had watched, said nothing, and now wished they had done more. Keanu sent a quiet message to the few staff he had come to trust, kitchen workers who'd given him warm nods in the hallway, bellboys who remembered his generosity, receptionists who had once seen their manager scream behind closed doors. No threats, no demands, just an invitation. "Meet us in the ballroom. 4:30. If you believe in respect over fear, kindness over image, come." By the time they entered the 7th floor ballroom again, the space no longer felt abandoned. Light streamed through the tall windows, dust swirling in the beams like memory made visible. One by one, people began to arrive. No uniforms, no formality, just people, tired, alert, quiet at first, but present. A man from the kitchen stood near the back. He had once been scolded by Jared for smelling like garlic in the elevator, a housekeeper named Nina, who had been written up for speaking Spanish too loudly, a young bellhop named Malik, whose paycheck had been docked when he called out sick to attend his grandmother's funeral. They were the invisible gears of the Avalon Grand. Now they stood together. At exactly 4:27, Lucia entered. She walked slowly, her shoulders stiff, her eyes scanning the room with a mix of caution and strength. The years had changed her, but her spirit had not broken. She wore a plain blue dress and no makeup, but she radiated the kind of beauty that comes only from dignity. Earned the hard way. Keanu met her halfway and offered his hand. "Thank you for coming," he said. She looked at him, then at the cross, around his neck. "That cross, I remember. Mia had one too." His breath caught. You knew her? Lucia nodded softly. She was at the shelter before she was moved to the hospice. We painted together once. She told me her dream was that one day people wouldn't be judged for who they prayed to or what they wore on their chest. Keanu's eyes glistened. She's still making that dream happen, even now. Lucia stood at the front of the room and spoke, not with anger, but with clarity. She told the truth about what happened that night. The broken tray, the rage, the firing, the silence. She spoke of the fear she felt when no one defended her, how she had doubted herself, questioned her worth, but also how over time she realized her worth had never depended on this place. It had come from within. By the time she finished, the room was completely still. Even those who had only come out of curiosity now stood straighter, their faces changed. And then, just as Keanu stepped forward to speak, the ballroom doors burst open. Jared entered, flanked by 2 hotel security guards and another man in a corporate suit, his superior. It was clear now. This was no longer a private matter. The higher-ups had been notified. And Jared, still clinging to control, had chosen to confront the fire head-on. This, Jared said, voice sharp and theatrical, is a violation of hotel policy. Unauthorized gatherings, unscheduled use of property, and disruption of staff operations. He turned to the corporate suit beside him. Mr. Levinson, I recommend immediate termination of the parties involved, especially him. He pointed directly at Keanu. He's not even a paying guest. He's trespassing, using our space to push personal beliefs onto our staff. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward Jared and held up the photograph from the incident report. This isn't about me, he said. This is about what you've done to others. To Lucia, to every person you made feel small in the name of appearances. The only image you ever cared about was your own. He turned to the staff behind him. But you can't bury truth forever. It finds its way out. Jared laughed once bitterly. And who do you think you are? Some savior? No, Keanu said. Just someone who finally had enough. For a moment, no one moved. And then Carla stepped forward. I back him. Then Jonathan. So do I. Then Malik. Then Nina. Then the kitchen worker. One by one, voices rose. Not in chaos, not in shouts, but like a rising tide. Soft, steady, unstoppable. Mr. Levinson stared around the room, his expression unreadable. He pulled out a small folder from his briefcase and read a printed summary of complaints. Most had been hidden until now. The pattern was clear. He turned to Jared. You're done here. Jared's face went pale. You're siding with them? With him? Mr. Levinson replied quietly. I'm siding with truth. And honestly, maybe this place could use more crosses and less cruelty. Jared was escorted out. But as he passed Keanu, he stopped and whispered bitterly, You'll never belong here. This place isn't made for men like you. Keanu looked at him with quiet strength. Maybe not, he said. But I'm here anyway. The day the lights dimmed, the news of Jared's removal spread through the Avalon Grand, like a gust of wind through a quiet forest, rattling branches, long thought unshakable. For years, the hotel had been a place where power spoke in silence, where fear dressed in etiquette and cruelty wore tailored suits. Now, in a single afternoon, a room full of voices had broken through that silence, not with protests or rage, but with calm truth. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was slower, more profound, like the slow shifting of earth before a quake. Something had changed forever. Keanu stood in the center of the ballroom long after the others had left. The room was emptier now, but still warm from the honesty it had held. Jonathan remained beside him, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the spot where Jared had stood. Do you think it's really over? He asked, not out of doubt but caution. Keanu shook his head. When something rots from the inside, cutting off one limb doesn't cure it. This place has deep roots. But this was a start. Downstairs, the mood among the staff had shifted in subtle ways. The nervous glances were gone. People spoke more freely, held their heads higher. Even Carla, who had once hesitated before, every word now moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen justice and helped shape it. But above all, there was a question echoing in the walls. What happens now? The hotel's upper management held an emergency meeting the next morning, not in secret, but in the open conference hall where shareholders once toasted meaningless profits. Mr. Levinson called together the senior team, the department heads, and, unusually, the staff members who had witnessed what happened in the ballroom. Keanu was invited, though he wasn't obligated. He sat at the long table with Jonathan beside him, both of them silent observers in a place that had never made space for their kind of truth before. Mr. Levinson began simply. "We failed," he said, his voice measured but honest. "We failed to protect our staff. We failed to uphold dignity. And we allowed a man like Jared to use fear as a tool of leadership." There was no applause, no dramatic music, just nods. The kind that come from people who know shame and are finally ready to move beyond it. "This hotel," Levinson continued, "was built on an outdated idea of perfection. Silence over struggle. Image over integrity. It ends today. We are reworking our internal policies, effective immediately. And I'd like to ask Mr. Reeves and Mr. Mercer to assist us in building a new staff code, one that actually reflects human values." Keanu didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "Only if everyone has a voice. Not just me, not just Jonathan, but people like Lucia, Malik, Nina, the ones who were silenced for so long. They should shape the rules they're expected to live under." Levinson nodded. "Agreed." Over the next few days, the Avalon Grand became something unfamiliar to its guests and even to its own walls. There was laughter in the staff lounge again, not forced or hidden. Employees smiled not out of obligation but ease. A suggestion box was installed, not one of those decorative boxes that no one reads, but a digital one tied to weekly meetings, where concerns were heard aloud. The ballroom, once a symbol of exclusion, became the space for weekly open forums. No ranks, no uniforms, just people, face to face. Lucia returned, not to reclaim her old job, but to speak. Once a week, she held a compassion session with the newer staff members, sharing stories of how kindness could survive even in the coldest places. She was no longer invisible. Her presence lit the halls brighter than any chandelier, and, yet amid this wave of healing, something unexpected happened. On the 5th day, just before sunset, the lights dimmed suddenly in the lobby. Not all of them, just enough to shift the mood from certainty to unease. A hush spread through the building as emergency backup lighting flickered briefly, then returned. Keanu, who had been speaking with a bellboy near the concierge desk, glanced up at the ceiling, alert. "That wasn't a power failure," he said, softly. "That was controlled." Carla appeared seconds later, holding her tablet, her eyes wide. "Someone accessed the building's electrical grid remotely. We just got flagged by the system. Unauthorized entry into our internal server, from an outside IP." Jonathan was already dialing the new head of security. 10 minutes later, they confirmed the breach. Someone had triggered a low-level power disruption and accessed archived emails, staff reports, and internal HR files. It wasn't a random hacker. It was someone who knew what they were looking for. This wasn't just retaliation, Carla whispered, reading the digital trail. This was preparation. Someone's planning to take everything we've changed and undo it. Keanu looked at Jonathan. "This wasn't Jared. It's bigger." Jonathan scrolled through the flagged logs. "These IPs, they're from a consulting firm, Paradigm Ethics and Hospitality Solutions. It's a company Avalon worked with years ago when they were rebranding. They're known for burying scandals, not fixing them." A new name appeared, Margot Devane, corporate strategist. She had been the original architect behind Jared's rise. She believed in control through perception, loyalty through fear, and leadership through erasure. "She's coming," Jonathan said grimly. "She's going to try and take back everything we changed." Keanu stared out the front glass doors of the hotel. Twilight was setting in. Cars moved below like shadows, unaware of the storm quietly forming at the top of the hill. "Then we'll face her," he said. Not with anger, not with revenge, with truth again. But something inside him knew this wouldn't be like before. Margot Devane wasn't just another Jared. She was the one who created Jareds. She didn't fight in the open. She worked in silence, with contracts and clauses, lawsuits and spin. She didn't yell. She erased. As night fell over the city, the atmosphere inside the Avalon Grand tightened. The workers felt it in their bones. They had stood up once. Now they'd be tested again. Not just for their courage, but for their unity. The ballroom would not be enough this time. They'd have to step beyond the hotel walls, into the city, into the public eye. And as Keanu sat in his suite, cross still resting gently against his chest, he whispered a quiet promise to Mia's memory. "I won't let her win, not this time, not ever." The woman behind the curtain. The morning fog rolled over the hills like a slow-moving veil, casting a muted light over the towering glass windows of the Avalon Grand. Inside, everything seemed ordinary. Bellboys wheeled carts across polished floors, housekeepers folded linens in crisp corners, and receptionists greeted guests with practiced smiles. But beneath the surface, tension swirled like smoke, thin and inescapable. Every staff member, from the kitchen hands to the top-floor supervisors, had heard the name now whispered through the halls like a warning. Margot Devane. She arrived just after 10. Not in a loud black SUV or a town car with tinted windows, but a simple, sleek electric sedan, silver as steel, driven by herself. She walked into the hotel not with noise or arrogance, but with the unsettling grace of someone who never needed to raise her voice to silence a room. Tall, poised, hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked sculpted. Margot wore a gray blazer with no logo, no jewelry, no color, only a small silver pin on her lapel, a geometric symbol, sharp and angular, representing the firm that molded her. The general manager met her at the door with a folder already trembling in his hand. "Ms. Devane, we didn't—" She lifted a hand. "I don't need excuses. I need access." Within 20 minutes, she had taken control of the hotel's executive lounge and requested a full list of the changes implemented since Jared's dismissal. Her eyes scanned documents rapidly, fingers tapping softly as she whispered commands to a personal assistant on her Bluetooth earpiece. Everything about her movement suggested calculation, precision. Her mind didn't see people, only variables. On the other side of the building, Keanu stood on the 7th-floor terrace, staring into the distance as sunlight broke through clouds. Jonathan sat near the edge, reviewing a document left behind from the previous meeting. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. They didn't need to. The moment of quiet was like the silence before a wave crashes. Finally, Keanu said, "She's here." Jonathan nodded slowly. "And she's not here for a conversation." Downstairs, Margot met with Mr. Levinson behind closed doors. She outlined her intentions in clear, practiced language. "You allowed sentimentality to take over a space built on discipline. While admirable, it is unsustainable. The changes to protocol, the open forums, the staff voice policies, they threaten investor confidence. The Avalon brand is not about inclusion. It is about aspiration. And aspiration," she said sharply, "requires control." Levinson leaned back, discomfort spreading across his face. "The staff are finally being heard. Morale is higher than it's been in years." Margot's voice didn't rise. "Morale doesn't pay dividends. Optics do." She slid a document across the table, an early draft of a proposal to rebrand the hotel under a new program. Elevate Protocol, a system she had designed to return high-end hospitality to its refined origins. It included performance-based contracts, silent service initiatives, guest comfort clauses, and a line buried deep within the policy. Visible religious or political symbols must be covered while on property. Levinson froze. "You're bringing back the very thing that caused this in the first place." "I'm correcting a deviation," Margot said. "This is not personal. It is structural." But as she gathered her notes, she didn't expect what came next. The door opened, and standing there was Keanu. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked in calmly, Jonathan just behind him. Levinson stood, unsure whether to intervene, but Margot simply turned, hands folded, watching Keanu as if examining an old relic from a past she had outgrown. "Mr. Reeves," she said without warmth, "I assume you're here to offer resistance?" "No," Keanu said softly. "I'm here to offer you a mirror." Margot raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Keanu stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. Inside were dozens of letters, handwritten, typed, even a few drawn by hand. They were from staff, former employees, guests, stories of injustice, of kindness, of people who'd been invisible and found dignity again. Stories of guests who returned, not because of the marble floors but because of Nina's smile, Malik's dedication, or Lucia's strength. "This is what your numbers don't count," Keanu said. "The human cost. You talk about aspiration, but aspiration without humanity becomes vanity. These people, these symbols you want erased, they're not noise, they're reminders. Of faith, of survival, of identity." Margot didn't blink. "Symbols divide." Keanu held up the cross. "No, they reveal." There was a long pause. Margot tilted her head. "And what happens when your truth affects the comfort of our wealthiest clients?" Jonathan finally spoke. "Then maybe you should ask why comfort only exists when someone else's truth is erased." Margot said nothing. That evening she called a press meeting. Not a traditional one. This was Margot's version. Subtle. Targeted. She invited a small group of media partners to tour the Avalon under the pretense of a relaunch. Her goal wasn't to expose the conflict. It was to reclaim the narrative. And her first act was chillingly strategic. She leaked an anonymous memo to her firm's affiliate publication claiming that a high-profile celebrity had manipulated hotel operations to promote personal beliefs, threatening neutrality and disrupting business integrity. By the next morning, the article was viral, not on mainstream outlets, but across whispers, forums, newsletters. It was enough. The headline didn't mention Keanu's name directly, but everyone knew. A-list actor accused of pushing agenda at luxury resort. Jonathan threw the paper down on the table in disgust. This is her game, weaponizing subtlety. No lawsuits, just suggestion, implication. Keanu's response was not panic. It was clarity. He walked to the front of the hotel, cross still visible, and stood beside Lucia, Nina, Malik, and dozens of staff members who chose to join him. A local news crew had already arrived, tipped off by a blogger who sympathized with the staff's story. When the camera turned on, Keanu didn't make a speech. Instead, he handed the microphone to Lucia, and Lucia told her story, not to shame the hotel, not to target Margot, but to honor truth. Then Nina. Then Malik. One by one, the staff spoke, not as victims but as people reclaiming space. Keanu stood quietly. No monologue. No grand finale. But the story told itself, and by the end of the day, the real headline began to change. Staff at luxury hotel speak out. Kindness is not a policy. It's a right. That night, Margot stood in her suite, reviewing the growing coverage. Her assistant entered with hesitation. "We're receiving calls," he said. "Some board members are asking questions. They want to know why we're suppressing community engagement." Margot didn't answer. She stared at the photo of Lucia on the front page. For the first time, she didn't feel in control. As the sun disappeared behind the city, Keanu sat by the fountain outside the hotel, watching the lights shimmer in the water. Jonathan joined him, tired but smiling. "You didn't say much today." Keanu looked up. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make space for someone else's voice." A light breeze moved through the trees, soft, steady, like healing. But the fight wasn't over, because tomorrow Margot would make her next move, and this time she wasn't coming for him. She was coming for Lucia. The cross that never broke. The sky over the Avalon Grand was heavy with gray, as if the clouds themselves were holding their breath. There was a stillness in the air that didn't feel like calm. It felt like the pause between the strike of a match and the blaze that follows. Inside the hotel, beneath the elegant chandeliers and soft music, a quiet war had begun, not with fists or fire, but with silence and strategy. Margot Devane was preparing to do what she had always done best: remove problems without ever appearing to touch them. And now her next target wasn't Keanu. It was Lucia. Lucia arrived that morning unaware of what had already been set in motion. She wore the same modest blue dress, the same soft strength in her eyes, and the same necklace that had once belonged to her grandmother. She walked through the lobby with pride, not arrogance, not defiance, just a quiet knowing that she no longer needed to shrink herself to fit into places that once made her feel small. She had faced humiliation, been erased, forgotten, and yet here she was again. Visible, whole, but Margot was already 5 steps ahead. By noon, Lucia received a letter slid under her door in a formal envelope marked Personnel Integrity Review. It was dressed in neutral language, but its intention was unmistakable. It accused her of falsifying information about her past employment history, of violating hotel confidentiality by speaking to the media, and of creating a hostile environment for current employees through emotional manipulation. The weight of the paper felt like stone in her hands. She stood there for a long time, the words blurring as her eyes stung. For a moment, the past came flooding back. How they had silenced her once before with paperwork and threats. How no one had listened back then. How she had walked away, believing she had no right to speak. This time, she didn't cry. This time, she walked straight to Keanu's room. When he opened the door, one look at her face told him everything. He read the letter twice before speaking. Then, with measured breath, he said, "She's trying to use the system we helped fix to destroy the person who fixed it." Jonathan joined them moments later, reading through the accusations. "She's pulling a classic maneuver, weaponizing the rules of justice to justify injustice. She wants Lucia out, not because of what she did, but because of what she represents." Keanu paced the room. "If we take this to the press, she'll twist it. She'll say Lucia's using her platform for revenge." "Then we don't fight with noise," Jonathan said. "We fight with clarity." That evening, a meeting was called in the ballroom. But this time it wasn't led by management, it wasn't sanctioned, it wasn't even formal. It was a gathering of hearts. Workers from every corner of the hotel came. Maids, valets, waiters, clerks, even guests who had heard whispers of what was unfolding. Word had traveled faster than any headline. Lucia stood before them. She didn't read from a script. She didn't plead. She spoke the way she always had, gently, honestly, from a place that had known pain but never surrendered to it. "I was fired once for dropping a tray," she said, "and now they want to punish me for picking up my voice. I didn't come back to destroy this place. I came back because I believed it could be more, for all of us." Keanu stepped beside her. He didn't speak first. He placed the cross in his hand, then looked out at the crowd. "Symbols mean different things to different people," he said. "But to me, this one has always meant one thing. You are not alone." He looked at Lucia. She stood up when she could have walked away again. She told her story when it would have been easier to stay quiet, and now they're trying to shame her for it. But if she's guilty of anything, it's reminding us what courage looks like. A voice from the crowd, Malik, called out, "We stand with Lucia." Then another, Nina. "She's the reason. We speak now." And slowly, a chant rose, not loud, not angry, but steady. "We are not afraid." Margot watched from the mezzanine level above the ballroom, arms crossed, expression cold. Beside her stood her assistant, phone in hand, whispering, updates from the board. And then, one message lit up her screen. She read it 3 times. "The board will vote to suspend your advisory contract pending review." Margot felt it, her control slipping, not because someone yelled louder than her, but because the people she once silenced had learned to speak in harmony. The next morning, Lucia was called to the main office, where Mr. Levinson met her with red eyes and a heavy sigh. "Lucia," he began, "I reviewed the claims. They're baseless. All of them. And this—" He held up the disciplinary letter, then tore it in half. "This was never going to happen. Not under my watch." Her eyes welled with relief. "But," he continued, "this hotel needs more than just policy changes. It needs people who understand what it means to rebuild from the inside." He handed her a new letter. An offer. Assistant Director of Guest Relations. Lucia covered her mouth with her hand, trembling. "You want me to laid?" he said simply. "Because we need that more than ever." Keanu stood at the front doors as the staff exited the meeting one by one. Jonathan leaned beside him, watching the laughter and lightness return like sunlight after a long storm. "You know," Jonathan said, "you didn't just change the hotel. You changed the people in it." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't change them. They were always like this. They just needed someone to remind them." They walked toward the fountain where it had all started, where Lucia had first spoken her truth to the world. She joined them there, smiling, hands tucked into her new blazer. She looked at Keanu, then at the cross he wore. "You never took it off," she said. "Never will," he replied. She nodded. "I used to think strength meant staying silent to survive. Now I know. It means speaking when your voice shakes." A little girl walked past with her mother, pausing as she noticed the necklace on Keanu's chest. "Mama," the girl said, "that man's wearing a cross." "Yes," the mother said gently, "and he's wearing it proudly." As the girl smiled at him, Keanu felt something shift, not in the world but in himself. For so long he had carried the cross in memory of Mia, but now it meant something more. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about legacy, about love that moves through time, through strangers, through spaces that once tried to erase it. That evening, the Avalon Grand didn't shine brighter because of new chandeliers or spotless marble. It shone because of what had been restored: dignity, respect, truth. And long after the guests went to sleep, after the lights dimmed and the music faded, Keanu stood alone beneath the stars, fingers gently tracing the worn wood of the cross. "Did it, Mia?" he whispered. "We made them see." Then he walked quietly into the night, leaving behind a hotel forever changed by one symbol, and one man who refused to hide it.